On a speck of coral more than 600 kilometers off the Australian coast, something was killing the largest gathering of sea turtles on Earth. Not sharks, not poachers, the island itself. Every nesting season, thousands of females the size of dinner tables hauled themselves ashore and never made it back to the water. For 30 years, scientists watched and counted the dead. Then a small team tried something that sounded almost absurd. They decided to build a fence. This is what happened. The island is called Rain Island. On the maps, it is barely a freckle, a low coral cay about 800 meters long on the far northern edge of the Great Barrier Reef. It sits roughly 620 kilometers northwest of Cairns, so remote that the public is not allowed to set foot on it. It is a protected national park, visited almost only by scientists and by the people who have known it the longest. To the Wuthathi Nation of Cape York, it is Thukuru. To the Miriam Nation of the eastern Torres Strait, the people of Ugar, Mer, and Erub, it is part of a living seascape they have cared for across 60,000 years of continuous knowledge. And once a year, this tiny island becomes the busiest turtle nursery on the planet. The green turtle is an old animal. Its ancestors were swimming these waters when dinosaurs walked the land, and the body has barely changed since. A grown female measures about 1.2 meters across the shell and weighs around 180 kilograms. She spends almost her entire life at sea, grazing on seagrass meadows hundreds of kilometers away. But when she is ready to lay eggs, she does something that still amazes the people who study her. She navigates back across open ocean to the exact beach where she herself hatched, decades earlier. Some of the females nesting at Rain Island today crawled out of this same sand more than 30 years ago. The scale of it is hard to picture until you see it from above. In December of 2019, researchers flew a drone over the waters around Rain Island and recorded something no one had ever properly captured. The sea was speckled with dark shapes, thousands upon thousands of them, all circling the island, all waiting their turn to come ashore. When the team painted a small mark on the shells of about 2,000 turtles and counted the ratio from the air, the number they reached was staggering. 64,000 green turtles around a single island the size of a few football fields. That drone count did more than produce a beautiful image. It revealed that every previous survey had been wrong. Counting turtles by eye from a small boat, the researchers had been undercounting them by a factor of nearly 1.73. The true population was far larger than anyone had believed. For Andrew Dunstan, the scientist leading that work, it meant something hopeful and something urgent at the same time. Hopeful because there were more turtles left than feared. Urgent because almost all of the northern Great Barrier Reef's green turtles, around 90% of them, depend on this one fragile island. If Rain Island fails, that entire population falls with it. And by the time those drones went up, Rain Island had already been failing for a long time. Scientists have studied the turtles here since 1974. For the first 2 decades, the work was mostly observation, tagging females, counting nests, recording the rhythm of the seasons. Then in the mid-1990s, the numbers stopped making sense. Catherine Robertson, a senior officer on the project, described the change as alarming. Tens of thousands of females were still arriving every year, but fewer and fewer baby turtles were emerging from the sand. When researchers began digging up the failed nests to find out why, the answer was grim. The eggs were drowning. Across 4 nesting seasons, the share of eggs that successfully hatched on Rain Island ranged from just 12 to 36%. On a healthy green turtle beach anywhere else in the world, that figure is usually above 80%. Rain Island, the most important nursery of its kind on Earth, had quietly become one of the least productive. The cause was the beach itself. Over decades, the low nesting beach had sunk relative to the sea around it. At high tide, salt water was now seeping up through the sand and into the nests below. A sea turtle egg is not waterproof. The embryo inside needs oxygen, and when a nest is flooded for long enough, the developing turtles suffocate before they ever form. Laboratory work on Rain Island eggs showed the cruelty of the margins involved. A brief soaking did limited harm, but around 6 hours underwater cut the egg's survival by roughly 30%, and the early stages of development were the most fragile of all. Every high tide was quietly erasing the next generation. But drowning eggs was only half of the disaster. The other half was happening to the mothers. Picture a female green turtle, 180 kilograms, built for gliding through open water and almost helpless on land. She comes ashore in the dark to nest. In the crush of tens of thousands of other turtles, she crawls inland looking for space, and she reaches the low rocky cliffs at the center of the island. These are not tall cliffs. They are ledges of old phosphate rock, only 1 meter or 2 meters high. But for an animal shaped like a tank, that is enough. She climbs, she loses her balance, and she tumbles over the edge and lands on her back. A turtle flipped onto its shell cannot right itself on dry ground. Her flippers paddle at the air. And as the tropical sun rises, the temperature climbs, and she begins to overheat. There was even a place on the island the crews came to call Death Rock, a single outcrop where hundreds of turtles became trapped beneath a ledge, unable to crawl back out. Others wedged themselves in the beach rock and could not pull free. Others simply ran out of strength on the open sand and died of heat exhaustion before they could return to the cool of the sea. In the worst seasons, as many as 2,000 adult females were dying on Rain Island every single year. Studies showed that cliff falls and entrapment alone were responsible for roughly 1/3 of all the turtle deaths on the island. Think about what that means. These were not eggs or hatchlings. These were grown, breeding females, the rarest and most valuable individuals in an endangered population, the ones who had already survived 30 years of open ocean to get here. And they were dying within meters of where they were born, killed by the shape of the island itself. So in 2014, a group of people decided to do something almost no one had attempted before. They decided to redesign an island. The effort became known as the Rain Island Recovery Project. It was not the work of one agency, but a partnership: the Queensland Government, the Australian Government, the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park Authority, the mining company BHP, and the Great Barrier Reef Foundation, all working alongside the Wuthathi and Meriam Nation traditional owners. Together, they committed nearly $8 million across 5 years. The plan was what scientists call adaptive management. Try a fix at small scale, measure exactly what it does, and only then build it bigger. Many of the actions they were about to take, especially on a place this remote and this fragile, had never been tried anywhere on Earth. And the very first idea they tested was the strangest one of all. To stop the falls, they would put a fence between the turtles and the cliffs. It sounds almost too simple, a fence to save an endangered ancient reptile. But the logic was precise. The turtles were not falling because the cliffs were unavoidable. They were falling because nothing stood between them and the edge in the dark. A barrier, placed correctly, could gently steer a wandering female away from the drop and back towards safe, open sand. The first trial, back in 2011, was tiny. The crew installed just 100 meters of modified aluminum pool fencing, the same kind of fencing that surrounds suburban backyards. It stood only 50 centimeters high, with vertical bars spaced about 30 centimeters apart, set along the tops of the small cliffs at the eastern end of the island. Crucially, they left the natural ramps open, so turtles could still move freely into the center where they needed to be. Then they did the only thing that matters in science. They counted. Before the fence went in, a survey of the cliff base found 60 dead turtles. After the fence went in, the same survey found 2. 60 down to 2. The strange idea worked. That single result changed everything that followed. Over the next several years, the team scaled the fence up around the island, replacing the backyard prototype with custom turtle-proof fencing designed for the job. In one later push alone, they added another 300 meters of barrier, lifting the protected length to 1,450 meters. By the time the work was complete, the island was ringed by roughly 1,750 meters of life-saving fence. And this is the part that matters most. The traditional owners did not stand at the edge of this. Wuthathi and Merriam Nation Rangers LED the installation of the fencing themselves on their own sea country, applying knowledge of this place that no outside scientist could match. But a fence could only stop the falling. It could do nothing about the drowning. So the team turned to the second, even harder problem. They were going to lift the beach. The operation moved about 40,000 cubic meters of sand, enough to fill 16 Olympic swimming pools, using heavy machinery shipped to one of the most isolated coral cays in the world. They reshaped around 35,000 square meters of nesting beach, raising it above the level the tides could reach. The change was immediate and measurable. On the reprofiled sections, eggs were now being laid above the floodline. Females spread out instead of crowding into the same doomed strip, which meant fewer of them dug up nests that had already been laid. And the higher beach held its shape. 5 years on, researchers confirmed the reprofiled areas were still stable, still working, still dry. Yet for all the engineering, the project never stopped doing the simplest thing of all. Every single morning, a crew set out on what they called the rescue walk. They walked the beaches at first light, and one by one they flipped overturned females back onto their feet, pried trapped turtles out of the rock, and carried the exhausted ones, all 180 kilograms of them, back down to the water before the heat could take them. It is slow, unglamorous, physical work. By one count, that daily walk alone saved the lives of 696 nesting females. And to know whether any of it was truly working, the team needed to solve one more problem. They needed to count the turtles accurately, which brings us back to that drone. For years, the counts had been done by hand. Researchers would paint a harmless white stripe on the shells of around 2,000 nesting females at night. The next day, from a small boat, they would count how many turtles in the water carried a stripe and how many did not, and use the ratio to estimate the whole population. But there was a hidden flaw. The human eye is drawn to the bright white mark. The painted turtles were easier to spot, the unpainted ones slipped past, and the final numbers came out biased and low. When Andrew Dunstan's team replayed drone footage frame by frame in the lab, that bias disappeared. From the air, every turtle was just a shape on the water, painted or not. The result, published in a scientific journal, was the corrected count of 64,000, and the realization that decades of data had undersold this population by nearly 3/4. Accurate numbers turned hope into proof, and the proof was extraordinary. Start with the cliffs. Over the life of the project, the share of turtle deaths caused by cliff falls dropped from 30% to 5%. That is the difference between losing roughly 1 in 3 of the island's turtles to a stupid, preventable accident and losing 1 in 20. By the most careful estimates, the fencing alone was now saving more than 500 breeding females every nesting season. 500 mothers every year who would otherwise have died on their backs in the sun, now crawling back to the sea to nest again. Then there are the EGS. With the beach lifted above the tides, the drowning that had haunted Rain Island for 30 years began to reverse. The reprofiled beaches doubled the amount of viable nesting habitat on the island. And the single number that captures all of it together is this. As a direct result of the Rain Island Recovery Project, more than 640,000 additional green turtle hatchlings have already made it off that beach and into the ocean. 640,000 baby turtles that, under the old conditions, would never have existed at all. And that number is not finished growing. It is only the beginning. Because of how green turtles live, the math compounds across decades. Every breeding female saved by the fence will return to nest again and again for the rest of her long life. Every clutch laid on the Ray's dry beach has a real chance of hatching. Researchers project that over the coming decade, millions more hatchlings will emerge from Rain Island, the slow interest paid on the lives saved today. There was an unexpected gift in the work as well. The same fencing that kept turtles off the cliffs also kept them out of the island's interior, where vast colonies of seabirds nest. For years, wandering turtles had been crushing seabird nests and scattering chicks. With the barriers in place, the birds got their ground back too. One project, quietly, had begun healing more than a single species. And every so often, the island offers a small reminder of how long these animals have been keeping their appointment with this beach. On one recent trip, researchers recognized a female from her old tag and realized she had first been marked 30 years earlier at a distant feeding ground and had not been recorded since. After 3 decades in the open ocean, she had come home to the same sand, to do the same thing her kind has done since the age of the dinosaurs. So here is what Rain Island actually teaches us, and it is worth holding on to. The animals were not dying because the world had run out of room for them, or because some force too large to fight had decided their time was over. They were dying from something fixable. A beach that had sunk a little too low, a ledge that was a little too steep in the dark. And the people who loved this place did not look away and call it nature taking its course. They studied the problem until they understood it exactly. They tested a humble idea, a backyard fence, at the smallest possible scale. They measured the result honestly. And when 60 dead turtles became 2, they had the wisdom to build on what worked, joining the newest science to 60,000 years of knowledge held by the people who have always cared for this island. It is easy to believe that saving an endangered species must require something vast and impossible. Rain Island says otherwise. Sometimes it takes patience, honest measurement, the right partnership, and a fence in the right place. Somewhere off the coast of Australia tonight, the tide is coming in, and it is no longer pulling the next generation under. On a beach that was nearly lost, 640,000 small turtles have already crawled down to the water and disappeared into the dark, exactly as they were meant to. If stories like this one are why you are here, this is what this channel is for. Follow along, and we will keep bringing you the places where the natural world is quietly winning.